Between his work as a guitarist and songwriter with Easybeats, and as a producer along with fellow Easybeat Harry Vanda for AC/DC, there is a very strong case to be made that George Young was the original sonic architect of Australian rock and roll. Other than Vanda, and with no disrespect to anyone who came before them, or followed after, the legacy of Young, who died yesterday aged 70, arguably outstrips anyone's. Those are big claims to make, so let's start at the beginning. Young was born in Glasgow in 1946, migrated with his parents and younger brothers Malcolm and Angus to Sydney in 1963, and met Vanda at Villawood Migrant Hostel, now shamefully a detention centre, the following year, an event Australian Musician magazine selected, in 2007, as the most significant event in this country's rock music history. That's another big call, but the Easybeats, Australia's first and finest response to the British invasion and the Beatles in particular, all but justify it by themselves. Their second single, She's So Fine, released in May 1965, launched them to local stardom. Their fifth, Sorry, led by a propulsive, serrated Young riff that prefigured younger brother Malcolm's rhythm work with AC/DC, took them to the top of the Australian charts. That was in October 1966, by which point the Easybeats had relocated to England. Until then, Young had written music for singer Stevie Wright, who contributed lyrics. It was the year of Revolver and Blonde on Blonde, and there were murmurs that the wild, colonial Easybeats lacked Polish by comparison. Young was subsequently teamed with the Dutch-born Vanda, who was still learning English. Their first recording was Friday on My Mind. The Easybeats' joyous paean to the end of the working week was a worldwide smash covered in years to come by everyone from Blue Oyster Cult to Bruce Springsteen, as well as David Bowie, who recorded it for his album Pin-Ups. In 2001, the Australian Performing Rights Association voted it the best Australian song of all time. It was added to the National Film and Sound Archives Registry in 2007. If that had been all, Young's legacy would have been secure. But it was his ongoing work as a songwriter and producer for other artists that turned he and Vanda into giants. As house producers for Albert Productions, they started out by rescuing the doomed Wright's career with the magnificent three-part opus Evie in late 1974. Around the same time, another Scottish emigrant, Bon Scott, joined AC/DC. A few stories sum up George Young's contribution to that band. First, as Clinton Walker has pointed out in his biography of Scott, Highway to Hell, Young insisted that AC/DC should never deviate from straight, hard rock and roll following trends he believed had been the Easybeats' undoing. He also identified the silence and space in Malcolm Young's stop-start riffs as crucial to their early sound. It's the stops what rocks, he said. The Easybeats in 1966, guitarists Harry Vanda and George Young, singer Stevie Wright, bassist Dick Dumond and drummer Gordon Fleet. Photograph Caroline Gillies. Getty Images. The most famous story is of smoke billowing from Angus Young's amplifier as he laid down the climactic solo for Let There Be Rock. From the control booth, George gesticulated and screamed at the guitarist to keep going, with Angus just managing to finish before his Marshall melted. There was no way we were going to stop that performance for a technical reason like amps blowing up, George said later. The work Vanda and Young produced for AC/DC, Let There Be Rock, especially, had a tougher edge than the sound Robert Mudlang gave the band for their international breakthroughs Highway to Hell and Back in Black, recorded after Scott's death. Vanda and Young were by then also working with the likes of the Angels and Rose Tattoo, who would go on to influence a new generation of hard rockers, notably Guns N' Roses. And yet again, there was still more to this story. For as much as Vanda and Young can be credited for birthing the sound of what we now know, sometimes somewhat derisively, as Oz rock, they were also writing and cutting huge pop and even disco hits. Can't Stop Myself from Loving You, performed by glam rocker William Shakespeare, followed by a string of songs including Love Is in the Air for John Paul Young, no relation. Vanda and Young even formed their own studio project, Flash in the Pan, whose first single, Hey St. Peter, released in September 1976, prefigured new wave just as punk was breaking worldwide. The song's B-side, Walking in the Rain, was covered in 1981 by Grace Jones on her seminal album Nightclubbing. The mesmerizing synth-pop of Waiting for a Train, released in 1983, featured Wright on vocals and hit number 7 in the UK charts. The story of Australian rock and roll, from the Easybeats to the Saints to the Hard-Ons and beyond, is of migrant kids. We should all be forever grateful for the day George Young met Harry Vanda at Villawood. And if it sounds like too much of a stretch to say Young defined the sound of Australian rock, listen to that manic, choppy riff from Sorry Again, then try to imagine it without him. Andrew Stafford is a freelance journalist.